My name is Victor Murinde. I'm the Executive Director of the African Economic Research Consortium, AERC. I bring you greetings from the AERC. I already see quite many familiar faces here. Yeah, good people who are members of the network of the AERC. So greetings. Now, this is possibly a non-orthodox way of doing this panel discussion. We start with the presentation about the AERC. We are remaining with only 10 days to complete the 5-year strategy that started in March 2020 and ends at the end of this month in 2025. Within 10 days, we shall be embarking on a 10-year rather than 5-year strategic plan, 2025 to 2035, from April 2025 to March 2035. And that's a transformational journey. It's a journey of transforming, or in the words given here, reinventing the AERC to be the main engine for capacity building and informing policy for Africa's economic prosperity for the next 10 years. And that's what I will be sharing with you. And then after sharing the highlights of the strategy with you, then I shall relocate to join a distinguished panel, introduce them, and then we go into the question, the cut and thrust of the main issues, and then come back to you, the audience, to get further feedback and also some ideas to extend the debate further than the presentation, but also to provide inputs, the start of inputs, because the input is continuous into the journey that AERC will take for the next 10 years. Okay, so this is a transformational plan to invent the AERC in the face of all the changes happening around the world, economic changes, geopolitical, aid dynamics and relocation of aid, and other issues that we shall be flagging up in the course of this debate. And where are we going? Okay. We know that the AERC has been in existence since 1988. And indeed, some of the familiar faces here are already part of the AERC network. And the network continues to expand. So the AERC exists both within Africa and also in a global context. We are building on the past achievements of the AERC, and these are phenomenal, both in terms of capacity building, but also in training. And there is a dimension that combines research and training, which is the policy engagement. There is already a lot of work on the ground. But we are making a step change, transformational change, in terms of where the AERC is going. The big idea is for the AERC to indeed become the locus, the hub of excellence for economics research, high-quality training, and impactful policy engagement in Africa. We are not, say, inventing a version of the NBR, North America, or a version of CPR. The AERC is unique in terms of capacity building, more than a think tank, a unique body that blends the economics profession, the economists working in academia, the economists working in government, the economists working in the private sector, together to be able to shape the destiny of the African continent. That's the point. And of course, we have a lot to show about what the AERC has been doing for the last almost 40 years. Of course, we start, say, for example, with the alumni or the leaders of the AERC or members of the AERC network who have risen to prominent positions in government leadership, especially in economic policy, both ministries of finance, and you can pick some of the key ministers like Mutui Kube, finance minister for Zimbabwe, and Adelaide Machane as a finance minister for Lesotho, but also actually previously central bank governor for that country for 3 years. Can think of in terms of the governors of central banks, Michael Ating Ego, Governor, Bank of Uganda, Louis Kaseke, the former governor in the same bank, Innocent Mashe, also a Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, many of those, including those alumni who are shaping policy, doing the work of a knowledge intermediary between researchers and policymakers. Those are think tanks as knowledge intermediaries. And Rose Ngugi is an example. In that, you have also people that have shaped both the developments, Professor Njuguna Dugu, the former executive director of the AERC, and also still playing a role in Kenyan government. You have even our very own Professor Robert Murinde here, who will be speaking here, and we highlight him as one of the eminent alumni of the AERC, and who is now guiding the research at the Central Bank of Kenya. And this is the catalog of a number of people, from those who are advising, like Jared Osolo or Albert Mwenda, and also chief executives of international think tanks like Jenny Kabu Maniara and others. This is just testimony. I could go on and go on. In fact, the list is long, the testimony of the success of the capacity building dimension of the AERC to build the capacity of individuals that are shaping the destiny of economic policy and economic development on the African continent. But it goes more than that. And a vision is constantly look into shaping the ultimate goal, or the objective function, if we want to say, is the sustained economic development, the economic prosperity of Africa, underpinned by what AERC does, which is knowledge base of economic development and economic management for governments, the private sector, and many other entities. And so the mission to the vision is to work through conducting independent, absolutely rigorous research into the problems pertinent on African economies. And we shall be igniting this vision. What really are the problems? Are problems evolving so quickly that we are unable to capture it? Are we missing the key problems? Maybe, but we are trying to capture some on our radar. And then through a synergetic combination of research excellence with the first research plus where there is beautiful mechanism in that research ecosystem and policy ecosystems. And of course, combine this with interactive communications. That's how we move forward to achieve the vision. The strategic plan 2025-2035 has been exposed to many members of the network. So some of you may already have encountered or even provided their input into how the strategic plan looks like. It was based on the decision memo that was shared with the board, and we just come back yesterday when we made a dramatic entrance into the session. We were coming back from meeting the board in Washington, D.C. And here are the main core areas of the strategic plan. Transformation of research offerings, reinventing graduate training on how we do master and PhD, policy engagement, going beyond a simply dissemination of research to policymakers. No, there has to be policy engagement to be able to deliver and achieve the impacts required. Also looking into the governance structure. The governance structure has been the same since 1988, has delivered a lot of work, but of course, the dynamics require that we go back and look into the governance structure. Also, in terms of entrenching the network membership, have solid network membership that can enable us deliver mandates. And in the dynamics, it's as if we anticipated that the ground will shift. The ground in financing development will shift as it has done. So we look into enhanced resource mobilization for financial stability. Then there is also addressing the issue of inclusion, because AERC is Pan-African, to be able to cut across the continents of Africa, and we share common ground with another organization called Economic Research Column, which addresses research in North America, but we do collaborate with the rest of the continent we share. And as far, in fact, south of the Sahara, and not necessarily north of the Limpopo, we go down up to the end of, say, South Africa. And then, of course, we also look at the cost risks. And I'm going to highlight some elements of these 8 areas very quickly in the interest of time. The research offering. A lot has been done in research, especially based on thematic research. We had groups A to E, and quite a number of familiar faces I can see here have been involved either as resource person, and I acknowledge Professor Jamano Mabu and Andy Mackay and others who have been very instrumental resource persons in ensuring that groups A and E get, delivery work. There are also a lot of collaborative research where we get senior researchers across Africa, work with the policymakers, address an issue broadly initially, and then go into country by country specifics. And that has worked very well. We pick the best elements of success from thematic, which is capacity building and mentoring. We pick the best element from collaborative research, which is co-authoring. And then we build an integrated research program, large enough to be able to build the two elements and to weigh in as much as possible from the researchers within Africa at all elements, senior researchers, early career researchers, doctoral students, to be able to work with senior researchers and global name recognition researchers who are based outside Africa, either diaspora or just as researchers, eminent researchers who have an interest in Africa, and then build a program. And we start with one example of a program so that we can now have a framework of templates on how it works. This is like a piloting with first one research program. And after piloting, we are able then to go and work on the other programs. On that, the keystone will be to identify what are the key ideas. We'll come back to this and discussing what are the key ideas. We just flag up some of the ideas now on our radar, including a government institution, economic fragility, where the number of fragile countries in Africa is going up day by day. I don't have to give examples here, but in Central Africa and Eastern Africa, fragility, how then can we be able to address? How should economists, trained economists, be able to maintain or reduce economic fragility in that case? The case of industrial policy, if you spoke about industrial policy 20 years ago, they would say there's something wrong in the way you behave. But of course, after COVID, everybody's moved. Most industrial countries moved into industrial policy. For Africa, it is imperative. It is imperative. And we want to see how the growth strategies can combine industrial policies and these. Unlocking Africa's digital potential. The biennial last year, 2024, was on the fintech revolution in Africa. And quite a lot of practitioners, fintech firms, researchers who are leading in the fintech area, combining Nairobi to look into this. So there are quite a number of areas. In this discussion today, we're going to call upon our eminent panelists, together with yourself, to shine a spotlight into some of the key areas. We as the AERC should not be missing what is on the radar. We should be able to follow up and constantly monitor the urgent areas that need our research and input, among the network. How are we rethinking graduate training? What has been achieved by the AERC over the last 30 years is phenomenal. When I did my undergraduate at Makerere University, I didn't know even what was happening. The students at Nairobi University were the same space, Dar es Salaam University. I didn't even know the faculty in those areas. And even my own faculty were not working with those. What has happened is phenomenal. A framework has been put in place where African universities can collaborate in especially master's training, where the faculty can collaborate in designing the modules, where they can collaborate in examining the modules, where they can collaborate in supervising PhD students. And that network is covering all economics departments across Africa, and those in the network. However, what's emerging is to see whether this collaboration can actually be able to expand, especially to address issues of quality, completion rates, how long does it take to complete a PhD, the quality of immediate publication from your PhD thesis, that's the quality of the research from the PhD, and the transformation is done to move and break the trail in two ways. One is to work with our network collaborators in the global north, outside Africa, and to be able now to do a step change from being not only Pan-African PhD, but also working with the global universities, to be able to see the areas of quality, whether it is at Oxford or to MIT or NYU. And fortunately, we actually have within the network members who are already working with on the research side. Okay, so the step change will be able to move that dimension to the training, so that we can be able to co-design a PhD program that will be delivered jointly with our network members in the global north. That's on the PhD front. The twinning dimension, and I want to acknowledge a discussion actually from many members here, including Professor Murinde here, including Professor Jamal Mabu, who has had a hand in the twinning. The twinning would actually completely enhance step change in the quality of PhD and also in the mentorship. The co-design of our professors in Africa with the professors from the rest of the world. And that's where we are going to make the twinning PhD program. But also at the master's level, now to articulate, there is now solid master's programs being offered across African universities. However, there is need for areas of intervention. Some of the African countries that have been underserved or addressing, participating in recovery from conflict, some states, to design a master's program that can quickly train people that can take on a policy dimension when economies recover from conflict. That's a special master's program. And then enhancing on the quality assurance of the training, beyond a simple, we call it simply external examiner system and others, to actually enhance the quality, and also to continuously use the research, the huge research dimension we're working on, to make sure that that research is feeding into policymakers and continuous professional training, so that a PhD graduate who completed 10 years ago from the AERC can continue to participate in new methodologies, new approaches, new data crunching numbers, movement to AIT and machine learning still carries, and that we can provide based on our research dimension. And in terms of policy engagement, impactful research, I acknowledge not all research can translate into uptake into policy. Some of the research may be just set the frontiers of knowledge, the next level. That's innovative. But the research we are looking at here is whether there can be a lot of engagement right from the start of the research program to ensure that the policy stakeholders and private sector are part of the research program. They are designed within the research program. And indeed, that for the private sector entities, actually, we can be able to see placing their problems and co-design. And a number of examples, good examples, have already been in place. Current projects, for example, supported by Gates Foundation between the government of Kenya, the leader, and the government of Kenya and the government of Ethiopia, in terms of how to implement, how to design tax systems or public finance management, which is in place. Another dimension will change was the governance and organizational structure. And here, a key issue is to put in place a research advisory committee. This will be a small committee of 5 people that I'll be working with. There are 5 individuals who have or demonstrated that they have on their radar developments across the globe and developments in Africa. In other words, even if they wake up at 2 a.m. in the gym jam, they can say, actually, it's critical minerals. Actually, it's this issue. We don't have a program on critical minerals, for example, in the AERC, in the African Economic Research Consortium, even when the critical minerals were underpinning the fragility in the East Africa and Central Africa, and also in the global dimension, the global geopolitics. Okay, so these 5 individuals will be the one to be able to bounce the ideas off and create input, and rotating every 2 years. Okay. And this is a new structure within the ERC. The network membership is critical. I've been active, and I can see a number of people here who've been very active in the ERC. Normally in thematic groups. I chaired Group C, which is Finance and Resource Mobilization, for more than 10 years. Even when I was working at the African Development Bank, I still was belonging as a member of the ERC. But what about the formalization of membership? We just worked with 3 interns in Nairobi to be able to put together the first ever database of who has worked with the ERC, who is a member of the ERC. And so we have, for example, in training, we have for every African country, the research universities involved, for every university, the economics department members, head of department, what are they producing in the last 10 years? The members of faculty, what have they produced in 10 years? Which shows you the specialism of their work and also the gravitas of their work. So we have that in membership. What about the policy making? So using this database, we are creating the acknowledgement, for example, the first ever fellows as a fellow of the ERC. So when they are signing off, their name, leaves a fellow of the ERC. And we awarded the first batch. This is not the last batch. The first batch, the initial batch in December 2024. And the system is in place for these fellows to be able to create every evaluation, maybe every 6 months, and then keep on awarding fellows. For the early career researcher, they become associates of the ERC. For those PhDs, masters, and other students also become affiliates of the ERC. So we can be able to define your membership of the ERC. But they also the founding fathers of the ERC who are still around. Very few are still around, unfortunately, but those who are still around get the medal, Distinguished Service Award, which we are issuing very shortly during June, or the Distinguished Service Award of the work recognition of the work they did. They did a lot of sacrifice, people working 24/7 to make the ERC happen. And we need everlasting control recognition of the work. This is the membership that will be, and then the formalization of membership of institutions. Afrexim Bank is an institutional member of the ERC. FCDO is an institutional member of the ERC. This is the membership and strategic partnership development. Then, of course, going on a strategic membership into bodies like, ASSET, which is Ghana, that's the African Center of Economic Transformation. Very, very, very doing some excellent work. The partnership policy headed by one of the alumni of ERC, the Economic Research Forum in Egypt. The idea, World Bank Institute, we're already doing work with the IMF Institute, the African Development Bank also institute. This is the strategic partnerships that we embed and recognize and give voice and space of work. Resource mobilization, we're going to cover that in the panel discussion. As the ground has shifted, we anticipate this would happen, but not so quickly. And what are we to do? What can be done? And that will be a discussion focusing on this, but let me just highlight it. And geographical inclusion. The mission of the ERC is to serve the whole of the African continent and link the African continent research in economics to the rest of the world. Okay. So there has to be a lot of inclusion. Rest of the world does not only mean the northern North America, Europe, but also means in Asia, and in the rest of the world. So we made that happen. Also to make sure that we inclusive both whether African countries are Lusophone, Anglophone, or Francophone. This is kind of a dichotomy that exists on the African continent. Will have to be kind of inclusive. And so inclusion, geographic inclusion, is a very important aspect of the ERC going forward. Finally, we do a pre-mortem. We stand in March 2035 and then peer backwards. In the language of Nairobi, where the ERC is headquartered, it is Chunguria. You look backwards and see, what is it that could happen that might derail the ERC from achieving these goals through the period from 2035? We identify 3 risks. And please, if you can identify risk number 4, please feel free to contribute to that. The three risks we anticipate is number one, the funding landscape. And it has come, the funding landscape has shifted. That could delay the AERC. Something has to be done. And our policies will contribute to this debate on what can be done and, of course, the ideas of what needs to be done. African governments and African entities, African institutions, including the African Development Bank, African, have a stake in the AERC. Okay. And they have to stand up now to contribute to this. So that is a real serious in our analysis, in our pre-mortem analysis of the potential risk. The second risk is the capacity of the secretariat. The skills for achieving the 10-year strategy plan are different from the skill sets required when we are doing this work for the last 30 years. We are undertaking a comprehensive review of the skill sets of our current secretariat. But we also need to build a framework where we are working with the support of all the network members I can see and those who are not here to bring in their skills and work with the AERC. It could be you are taking a sabbatical from Oxford or Cape Town and spending 3 months at the AERC to be able to bring your skill sets, the work of the AERC. That is most welcome. And I can see for all these young people, I always feel very, 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 very comforted when I see a lot of young people in front of me, because it makes me that there is actually the destiny of the AERC is in good hands. And basically, it's possible they can take a sabbatical for 1 year and what you are doing. You can actually bring your skills and work with the AERC, indeed, during this 10-year strategy. So this is kind of a potential risk, a potential risk number 2 in the pre-mortem. Number 3 in the pre-mortem analysis is, of course, the political governance risk. And we mentioned the fragility in Eastern and Central Africa. That is for real. And there has to be a way of diversifying. I remember when I joined the African Development Bank, it was a time when they had this risk, the governance for risk. For many years, the African Development Bank was based in Abidjan, in Côte d'Ivoire. Then Côte d'Ivoire went to war. And for the first time, it was real. Actually, we don't have regional headquarters. We're operating from the same area. And subsequently, now you have strong regional centers of the African Development Bank in West Africa, in North Africa, in Central Africa, based in Nairobi, and South Africa, based in Pretoria. So there has to be a way of creating that diversity and de-risking a single focus of headquarters in one area. So these are on our way. So in conclusion, I'm sorry, taking a bit longer, but the AERC is embarking on a new direction of travel and needs you, each one of us. So our hands on the deck, and your involvement in this transformation is very much required and appreciated. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. So as I mentioned that state, this is like a 2-stage drama whereby we present the direction and the vision of the AERC going forward. And we move now to the panel discussion. We are delighted to have a distinguished panel of members who have been very active in the AERC. I think it's helpful if I just briefly highlight the introduction of these members. I think I can't do justice to them because they are people with a lot of achievements. But we are pleased to have here Professor Ingrid Woolard on my left. How do I introduce Ingrid? She's the Executive Dean of the University of Sussex Business School since January this year. And before that, she was the Dean of the Faculty of Economics and Management Sciences at Stellenbosch University in South Africa. In fact, the first woman to hold that position in the 99-year-old history of the faculty at Stellenbosch. She holds a BSc in Mathematical Sciences from KwaZulu-Natal and different degrees also from Cape Town. She's also has been and she's still an honorary professor of economics of poverty and inequality at Groningen University in the Netherlands. So twinning to you becomes very natural. Twinning person we have. She's a research fellow of the Institute of Labor Economics in Bonn, a non-resident fellow of UNU, wider in Helsinki, and research associate in the Commitment to Equity Institute at Trent University in New Orleans. She has also played key critical roles as advisor to economics ministers in South Africa for a long period, say from 2008 to the present, various ministries. So she has a stint of academic excellence and also policy engagement at the highest level of the country. So let's welcome Professor Ingrid Willard. I also have the pleasure of introducing on my right Professor Robert Murinde. In one word, Robert is ERC and a good friend, okay? But just in full, he is now the chief economist and the director of the research department at the Central Bank of Kenya, and also a member of the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Kenya. He's a member of the Royal Economic Society and Society for Financial Econometrics, a seasoned economist, has more than 2 decades of experience in macroeconomic and applied econometric research and capacity building in many, many areas of economics, but also has served as a lead consultant to several projects in various institutions, including the World Bank, the United Nations Commission for Africa, the financial sector deepening, governments, including the Kenyan government as well as the Ugandan government. And he's also been awarded the IMF Academic Fellowship for his research on economic issues. And prior to joining the Central Bank of Kenya, Professor Murinde was the professor of political economy and director of the Institute of Public Policy and Governance at Strathmore University. And one last word. I rely heavily on Murinde for second opinion, 24/7. He never lets me down. So let me introduce to you Professor Robert Murinde. And last but not least, yeah, is our very own Dr. Abi Kadir. Dr. Abi plays a critical role in this transformation that we've just highlighted. And indeed has been at the core of authoring that transformation, because he's the director of research at the African Economic Research Consortium and heads that research body and the transformational and all the network of the AERC. He did his undergraduate work at Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia, and his MSc and PhD from the School of Economics at the University of Nottingham. Indeed, worked with very distinguished people I can see here. Andy, we recognize you for being able to mentor one of the great brains that is transforming the ERC. And he joined the African Economic Research Consortium about 6 months before me, joined in 2023 from the University of Sheffield in here in the UK, where he was a linear academic. But he has also had long service interactions with the governments, especially government of Ethiopia, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, on various assignments, the World Bank, UNDP, UN Women and African Development Bank, and others. So he's been very active, absolutely, in many areas of economic work. And he's been prolific in terms of publishing and also supporting editorial boards of a number of journals, the Journal of Development Studies, for example, right now. And he's co-authoring together with the Professor Oliver Morris at Nottingham and Professor Joshua Boa at the University of Ghana on what will become one of the path-breaking work full of ideas on shaping development economics and development finance in Africa. Please, let's welcome Adi first. So we are pleased to have these three distinguished panelists. What I will do is just to direct some questions around to be able to start the discussion in some certain area. The first one, as I highlighted when I make a presentation, what is on your radar? What really are the key critical economic challenges Africa is facing today? Could certainly just to get an insight into these problems and also to excite members of the audience later to come in and share with us some of the problems on their radar. What is on your radar in terms of economic challenges and economic problems facing the African continent? Maybe I've turned and look to Professor Murinde in this area.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks a lot, Prof. Murinde. It's a great pleasure to be here at St. Catherine's College, Oxford, and thanks a lot for the invitation. So Africa's problems are complex, multifaceted. We could say a lot of progress has been made over the last few decades, but I think a lot still remains to be done. And as a policymaker, I would say we're always thinking through these issues. Whenever we have our Monetary Policy Committee meetings at the central bank, we're always confronted with these issues in one way or another, and are always trying to see how to adapt to them and how to contribute towards solving them. So I put them in several categories. I think the first one is a long-standing issue, which is the issue of inclusive growth in African countries, or the lack of it in quite a number of African countries. And if you look at IMF projections this year, for example, African countries are expected to grow roughly by 4.2%. This is an improvement from last year. Last year, the estimated growth maybe was about 3.8%. If you remove two of the big countries, that's South Africa and Nigeria, which have been struggling quite a bit, that growth goes up to about, expected growth to about 5.5%. But a big question is, how inclusive is this growth? Yeah, and you realize that in many African countries still, let's say, large segments of the population are excluded from gaining from the benefits of this growth. There are issues at quite a number of levels. I think the most fundamental one in many cases is institutions that in many African countries, despite a lot of progress made, we still don't have inclusive institutions. Many institutions are still extractive in many of these countries, and this hinders, let's say, promotion of further inclusive growth. There are also other challenges, in informal sectors in many African economies are quite large. So whereas these are important for job creation, for informal sector job creation, many of these jobs are not really very stable, and still large, even though these jobs contribute to economic growth, they contribute to employment, you still find that many segments of the population are still very vulnerable. And underlying also many challenges in Africa's economies is the question of innovation. There are some sectors where you've seen quite some innovation, but many critical sectors, for example, the manufacturing sector, still continues in many African economies to struggle. You don't have enough product process innovation. There's a lack of an industrial policy, as Prof. Murinde alluded to, said the importance of having an industrial policy. So many still lack a way of coordinated, let's say, development among the sectors. So then, because of that, we're not able to enter global value chains effectively in many areas. In fact, now the challenge for many economies has been trying to enter regional value chains effectively, take advantage of the African continental free trade area. But still, there's a big challenge for many African economies in terms of trying to access global value chains in many critical areas, and this limits growth. So that's one broad area which is very complex and I know has been studied by many of you in different respects. Now going to an area we as policymakers also deal with a lot is macroeconomic instability. You'd say that in some respects, having come from the COVID shock just a few years ago, where there was considerable macroeconomic vulnerability in many African countries, many countries were actually recovering in the last 2-3 years. And now it seems we're about to enter into another phase of global shocks. But you'd say that there's been quite some progress in terms of economic reform that's enhanced macroeconomic stability in quite a number of African states, but vulnerabilities still remain. Just looking at a few different domains briefly, because I'm just setting the scene, is the fiscal domain. The fiscal domain, fiscal challenges in many African countries still persist. You've had quite some fiscal consolidation because quite a number of African countries are on IMF programs, and so that's led to some fiscal consolidation. Of course, we have had cases of countries that had such severe debt challenges that they had to go for debt restructuring. But despite progress made in the area of fiscal consolidation by many African countries, critical challenges remain. One of the biggest ones is debt service. You find in many African countries, debt service is about 20 to 30% of revenue, which means that less and less is left every year for development spending, critical development spending. Most revenue goes to debt service and recurrent spending. And the amount going to development spending to achieve critical outcomes like health outcomes, educational outcomes has been declining, consistently. So on the surface, even though you see some fiscal consolidation outcomes improving, when you actually analyze the data in greater detail, you realize in many countries actually there are critical development outcomes that are suffering. Of course, many African countries in the last 2-3 years have been able to have gained access again to international capital markets, for example, Eurobond markets, which is a good thing. It speaks of some confidence in the economies. But the challenge is then that then you have to borrow at commercial interest rates. And then already burdened by high debt service, then this tends to complicate the picture of debt service quite considerably. On the monetary front, and this is the one that I'm more directly involved in as a policymaker, there's been also some progress in the last couple of years. You'd say about half of the countries, if we talk now more specifically about sub-Saharan Africa, you can say have the inflation within their target bands after having come from very high inflation about three years ago. Now inflation is more within the target band, but you still have a number of countries that are struggling with about, say, 20% of countries in sub-Saharan Africa are still struggling with double-digit rates of inflation. And because many African economies are open economies, you find whenever you have global shocks, we tend to be particularly vulnerable, being small open economies. So shocks are beginning to emerge again this year. Sure, you followed closely. Let's say increased U.S. protectionism and the impact that is likely to have. Of course, what this is going to mean is the levels of inflation are going to go up, including in advanced economies. This is going to feed through into quite a number of critical areas, commodity prices, and many other critical areas. And generally, although this was expected initially to be a year of declining inflation, now there are new inflationary pressures that are emerging, and pass-through. The pass-through tends to be, especially the exchange rate pass-through, tends to be quite significant, and food pass-through, global food price pass-through. So we're again entering an era where we now need to be concerned about inflation. Of course, what this will mean is once you have higher interest rates in key advanced economy central banks, then that's going to mean higher for longer interest rates, which will mean probably stronger currencies, for example, stronger US dollar, which will mean weakening currencies, greater depreciation in currencies of African countries, hence exchange rate pass-through and critical concerns. So just saying that even though we were getting out of the woods on the inflationary front, now some concerns are starting to re-emerge. Same thing you could say about the external balance side. There's another critical component of macro stability. Current account deficits had started declining, going to 4-5% of GDP, more manageable levels. But again, challenges are beginning to emerge with potential weakening of currencies. Then you're likely to see some deterioration there. You still have about a third of the countries in Africa that still have reserves below 3 months of import cover, which is considered sort of a minimum for the economic size and openness of those kind of countries. So you're going to see global shocks potentially also having an impact, leading to deteriorating external sector balances in these countries. So on the macro front, whenever you have global shocks being anticipated, then this is always a point of vulnerability. Of course, climate shocks continue to exert a very critical influence. They continue to really occupy the minds of policymakers because you have both extremes. You have floods at certain times that create a lot of damage, and then you have droughts. So in several countries in Southern Africa, for example, last year, you had severe drought. In several countries in Eastern Africa last year, you had floods. So you have the different extremes. So as a policymaker, you're always thinking about climate shocks and the impacts that they have. So I mentioned a couple of other problems briefly. I think one of the big ones, and I think one of my fellow panelists will talk about the consequences in greater detail,